The passage of time. We have shared your joy at the birth of your children, and proudly we have watched them grow. We've taken care of your healthcare needs during the good times and the not so good. Your parents and grandparents have depended upon us. Together we have shared the struggles and the wonders of life. At Oktibbeha County Hospital, we are celebrating 30 years of being your lifelong choice in healthcare.
I think everybody's here that's going to be here. Mr. McLaurin is kind of under the weather, will not be here tonight. Mrs. Self, how are you tonight? I didn't get to speak to you earlier.
Thank you.
We were talking about earlier, I didn't know if you had a chance to look. Just for your...
Did y'all put your heads together for consent
I got
items?
one.
Tammy, is this agenda I got right here the same one I got in here?
You have the correct agenda on the panel.
Okay, this brings us a regular recess meeting to order. To start with, do we have any additions, deletions of the current agenda? Did anyone say anything or changes they'd like to make before we get it started and ask for approval?
Mr. Mayor, I would like to move up item number, under Roman number 10, Department Business, number 7, consideration of naming of road off Sutterth Road and annex areas in North Starkville to Rutherford Road. The requesting party has to leave early. If we can move that up after the public hearing, it won't take but a minute. It should be a routine matter. If we can move that up after the public hearing.
All right, move it up after the public hearing.
Roman number 10A7.
All right. Just any other changes, any items that anyone would consider for consent items?
In the interest of time, Mr. Mayor, propose that we move the following items to a consent agenda. The first item would be under Roman numeral, Roman numeral 9, board business, item F and item H. In addition, under Roman numeral 10, which is department business, items 6 and 8. Under that same Roman numeral 10, B, which is Office of City Clerk, Roman numeral number 1. C
Wait a
for...
minute, Roman, you mean just
Oh, sorry,
item number 1?
I sure do. Thank you. Under C, Electric Department, items 1, 2,
Yeah. Items 1,
2, 3, 4,
wait a minute. 4,
5, and 6. D for Fire Department, item 1. Under Personnel E, items 1, 2, 3, and 6. Under E, Police Department, items number 1 and 2. And then under Public Services, items 1, 2, and 3.
2/3 of the agenda. Has everybody had an opportunity to look at those particular items, that we move those to consent? Do we have a second to Mr. Cox's motion on these consent items?
Second.
We have a motion with a second. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of those particular items, and I'll go back through these as the changes. And this is not part of the consent, but after public appearance, we moved Roman numeral number 7 on the roads to the second after the public appearance. Items for consideration for consent are under Roman numeral number 9, F, and H. Under Roman numeral number 10 would be items 6 and 8. Under Let's see, I think you said, this is where my pen ran out, Office of the City Clerk, item number 1.
Yes, sir.
All right, consent. The Electric Department, item number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Under D, Fire Department, items number 1. Under Personnel, items 1, 2, 3, and 6. Items E, under Police Departments, item 1 and 2, under consent. Under Public Services, item E, consent number 1, item number 1, item number 2, item number 3. Do those are the items that fit in your motion?
That's correct.
We have a motion with and a second. All those in favor of the consent items, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. This brings us now for the approval of the official agenda, if all of this is in proper order and meets your satisfaction.
I'd move approval of the official agenda.
We have a motion to move approval of the official agenda. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. It brings us down to the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of December the 5th and January the 2nd of 2007, and the recess meeting of October the 17th, and the special call meeting of November the 28th. And I believe, Ms. Tyndall, this brings us up to date on all minutes at this particular point. It's the pleasure of the board, if you've had an opportunity to read these minutes, and perhaps you've submitted some of your corrections to Ms. Tyndall.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of December the 5th, 2006. And
Do
I'll
we-
take these individually.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay.
Move approval of the minutes of January 2nd, 2007.
Do we have a second? Second. We have a motion with a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Move approval of the minutes of the recess meeting, October 17th, 2006.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay.
And finally, move approval of the minutes of our special called meeting, November 28th, 2006.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion with a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Thank you, Mr. Cox. It brings us down to comments by the mayor and the board, and I would like to be able to officially announce the good work that Starkville in Motion has done for this city, that we got an official notification today from the Department of Transportation, and Mr. Cox's good work in regard to helping to get this situated. We received a grant for $1,260,000 to implement another bike lane, which we're going to be noted in this community for fitness and good healthy issues, and maybe that will help to get everybody's health insurance premiums down for those of you who have to pay for your own health insurance. Mr. Cox and I are very aware about how important that is. Any of the aldermen would like to say anything at this time? This is, again, a city which we've got a lot of progressive things that are happening here, a lot of good positive things that are happening in our community.
Just, Mr. Mayor, if I might, on that grant, just as a reminder, this is considered to be a multi-use path. It is different from the bike lane that we currently have in the city. This will be off of the road, and it will allow for bicycles, strollers, rollerblades, everything. It'll be a very protective and safe environment that connects the university all the way to the sportsplex. But when people hear bike lanes and bike paths, this is different from what we've experienced before, and really is a giant step forward for our community. So,
Even has bollards on the side of it to keep cars from being able to get up there on it. So it's really going to be an attractive addition to the community, and I think something that everybody will be quite proud of. Brings us to citizen comments, and the door and the floor is open for comments from citizens. This is your opportunity to come up and take about 3 minutes, give your name and the ward or who you represent, since you don't have a ward.
Mr. Mayor, Board of Aldermen, my name is Ron Cosman, and I regret to inform you that I'm not a resident of the city of Starkville. So I'll take my 2.5 minutes that the mayor
I added
traditionally
30 seconds to you tonight, though, if you remember.
All right. First of all, I wanted to thank the board and particularly Bill Webb, the city engineer, for helping us on the Lynn Lane project. He was most instrumental in helping us pull that together. And tonight I wanted to report on another project that we're working on, which is the Safe Routes to Schools. And you have added to your packet a one-page summary of this particular project. Starkville in Motion right now is in the process of developing a grant proposal to MDOT for this Safe Routes to Schools program. The purpose is to improve the health and well-being of children by enabling and encouraging them to walk and bicycle to their schools. Now, this is federally funded through MDOT, and the grant will be 100% federal dollars, and there is no city match whatsoever. However, it is a reimbursement program, so we would need to expend the monies first and then be reimbursed by MDOT. We're looking at a grant proposal in excess of $100,000 staggered over 2 city fiscal years to reduce the impact on the budget. The emphasis is on grades 4 through 8, which means Ward Stewart, Henderson, and Armstrong. We're currently working with the school board, individual principals, the PTAs, parents, and of course the city engineer to develop a range of infrastructure improvements and also in-school programs. And in fact, I wanted to note the fact that the chairperson of the Safe Routes to Schools Committee, Lois Cummington, is meeting this hour with the PTA at Ward Stewart and was unable to make this particular appearance. Infrastructure will include things like striping, bike lanes, bike paths, signalization, traffic calming devices, cones, and probably some connector routes through some undeveloped areas of town, especially near Ward Stewart. And we're working very closely with each school to help determine what exactly are their most important priorities. We're also going to be looking at programs that focus on education and encouragement of cycling, walking, and healthy attitudes and habits within the schools. And for that purpose, one of the things we're proposing is a partnership with Mississippi State University's health promotion program to provide the expertise that the schools need at no additional cost to the school system. By the way, we were, as some of you may know, we hosted a site visit by the state Safe Routes to Schools coordinator in December. She came to see what was going on in Starkville. She was very impressed with not only the level of energy, but also the level of cooperation between the city, Starkville in Motion, and the school system in terms of trying to come up with this program. And in fact, we are featured in the January issue of Active Living Network, a website that's funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, as being a model for Safe Routes to Schools, at least in Mississippi. The deadline for this application is March 1, and we will be presenting to the board for final approval a application at the February 20th meeting.
Very good. Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions? Look for you in February.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Turner, how are you tonight?
All right. We believe that would be good, Stan. Good evening to the Mayor and Board of Aldermen. We are hoping that
before the year's out, we put this dead horse to sleep over and over about the justice complex and police department. The taxpayers are being worried that we spending taxes, but we cannot see anything that is helping. 82 need a lot of things besides the jail and the funeral home. Like we would just like to see a lot done. We took office with July 1, 05. July 07 is fast approaching, and we would just like to see some things done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Anyone else this time would like to come up and express themselves?
Good evening, Mayor and Alderman. How are you
doing?
this evening? Good. My name is Mangle Shanks. I work with a program called Experience Works. And what I do in the community, we just moved into your community in November. We took over the program that was operated by the Forest Service, the Title V program. So what we do in the community, we help individuals that are 55 and older to get back into the workforce. And I have folders. I'm going to give you the information, but I want to share this, talk with you for a few minutes first. Individuals that are 55 and older, we work with any type of nonprofit that has a 501c3 and any government agency, be city, state, or whatever type of government. And what we do, individuals that qualify for our services, we are funded by the Department of Labor, so it's no fee for our services, number one. But individuals that qualify for our services, we place them at what we call a host agency. And a host agency is what I just mentioned to you, to what we call work and train, work and learn for 20 hours a week. And we pay them minimum wage in order to do that. At some point, the ultimate goal of our program is to get them back into the workforce, not to stay on our program, because we're mandated to keep a waiting list to serve as many people in the community as possible. And what I'm before you tonight to see if the city is interested in having this program operate within your communities, within the city. There is a host agency agreement that must be signed by the city between Experience Works and the city before we can begin operation. And to have a participant in your agency, it saves your budget around $7,000 a year. So what is the advantage to you? You get free labor, the participants get training, on-the-job training. At some point, we start work with them to get them a job in the private sector. We are a member of the local chamber. We've been in business ever since 1965. We started out as an organization called Green Thumb. We also operate in 27 counties within the state of Mississippi. And we also have started to gain some agencies within Octavia County.
Have you talked with anybody of the city administration at all
No, I
about
haven't talked
this?
with anyone. This is my first appearance to talk with you.
I see, okay. Do any of the board members have any questions about this?
Looks like you've brought some information for
I
us.
do,
Perhaps you
I
could.
do.
If you could pass that
I
out
am.
to everybody.
I will, and I'll tell you-
perhaps,
ahead.
you could say, get in contact with our CAO
Okay.
and
Who is that?
discuss this, for this, and we could bring the exact details forward to the board, maybe at the next board meeting or something.
Okay, and who is the CAO?
Ms. Lynn Spruill.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All of these do not have our last annual report.
Okay,
But a few of them does, okay.
very good. Does anyone else have something they would like to say at this time? Okay. At this time, we have our annual report from Judge Ishii and Roy Carpenter and the court administrator. Are they all, I know, I don't see Carpenter, but that's okay.
Yeah,
You're gonna be doing all the talking anyway, aren't you?
Roy generally doesn't come with us. So it's just Tony and myself. Mr. Mayor and Board of Aldermen, thank you for the opportunity to be with you all tonight. The reason for our being here, of course, is to give you the annual report for the Starkville Municipal Court. You should have a packet of information in your folder. Does everyone have a copy of that? Okay. These figures go back several years, as you see, to show us where we have been, where we are now, and where we are probably going in the future. You will note from these statistics that our traffic citations were slightly down in 2006, 167 cases. In 2005, 9723, down slightly in 2006, 9556. There was a dramatic increase, however, in DUI cases. 2005 saw 292 DUI cases in our jurisdiction. 2006, 343 cases, up 51. I am told by the Chief of Police that the Police Department has received a DUI enforcement grant that may this year and next increase the number of DUIs even more. The misdemeanors were down slightly as well. In 2005, 1,572. Last year in 2006, 1,297 for a decrease of 275. I attribute that to the lack of visitation on part of the state agencies that frequented our jurisdiction back in 2005. They visited with us less frequently in 2006. And I'm speaking there mainly regarding underage drinking, underage possession of alcohol at the various establishments here in Starkville. The felonies were about the same, as you see. The total number of new cases in 2006 were 11,082 cases, down slightly from 11,531, a decrease of 449 total cases. In general, however, the statistics were about the same for 2005 and 2006. Page 2, you will see a significant increase in court collections, largely attributed to the increase in court personnel that you approved last year. Despite our lack of personnel space and working space that you're well aware of, the municipal court is functioning well here in Starkville, Mississippi. The court administrator and clerks are diligent in their duties in serving the city of Starkville and its citizenry. The fourth term of court has helped us tremendously in court to relieve us of overcrowding in the hallway and in City Hall. However, we did have a fist fight right outside the courtroom last week.
I'm worried about people looking for the mayor with that type of activity going on.
Yes, sir. There is, of course, plenty of police personnel that's always with the court on the metal detector, and so that situation was handled very quickly by the police department. The fourth court term has also allowed us in the court to devote the time and attention necessary to serve the ends of justice here in this jurisdiction. There have been 2 police officers that have been assigned as court liaison officers that are beginning to work with our clerks regarding the backlog of warrants. These 2 individuals will also serve as court bailiffs. The municipal prosecutor, Mr. Roy Carpenter, is representing your city well in court. The court continues to enjoy a good working relationship with the various law enforcement agencies. Our thanks go to Chief David Lindley. I don't know if he's here tonight or not. Thank you, Chief. As well as Assistant Chief John Outlaw and Sheriff Dolph Bryan for their excellent cooperation with the court. And of course, we know that there must be good cooperation between the executive branch of government and the judicial branch of government. There is interaction to a great degree between these two parts of our government. I also want to thank you all for your support of municipal court. Do you have any questions that I might address at this time?
Are there any questions from any of the aldermen? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I believe that's the only filed public appearance that we had for this evening. That will bring us down to Roman numeral 10, number 7, which deals with the road. Is that not correct, Roy?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Considering the naming of the road off of Sutherth Road and an annexed areas in North Starkville?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, may I be recognized?
Yes, certainly.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to recognize one of my distinguished constituents, Mr. Clark McMahon. If he would come to the table and join the gentleman at the table. And Mr. McMahon has requested for this street to be named. And I just would like to yield the floor to him and for him and let him give a presentation to the mayor and board as to why we should honor this request.
Mayor and the board, I came to Mr. Perkins with this request. This area was annexed in the city on October 1st, 1998. This is in recognition of my grandparents, who I now live on this property, and they lived on that property since the early 1900s. Operated a farm there and were members of this community for many years, and I'd just like to recognize them with the naming of this road. It's unnamed at this time. It borders the property that they owned until their death.
Does it have one of those county names, numbers on it or anything?
No, sir. It was built by the state when the bypass came through, and it was given to the county. And it was built by the state, given to the county, and when the city annexed it in, they annexed this road in. It's now City Road without a name since 1998.
Ms. McMahon, you have discussed this matter also with Ms. Margaret Copeland.
I've talked to all the neighboring people that own land that live in this community. There's one person that owns lands on this road that doesn't live in this community, and I did not contact that person, but I talked to all the adjoining landowners, and they all thought it was a great thing to honor my grandparents with this name of this road.
Mr. Mayor, I have also discussed this matter with our contract engineer, Mr. Bill Webb, and he concurs with this request. And also I'm looking at the staff action where staff recommends approval as submitted, and Post Office and 911 have approved this request. This road, Sutherth Road, just for the purpose of the mayor and board and the public, is traveling north on Highway 389, go across the highway, I guess 82 bypass, and the next road up to the left will be Sutherth Road to the left, and Sutherth Road dead end, and the road is to the left. It's currently a gravel road. It's unnamed. And Mr. Mayor, in light of the fact that Mr. McMahon is making this request and there's no objection from any of the property owners, and they fully concur, the city engineer fully concur, and I move that this unnamed road off of Sutherth Road be named Rutherford Road, to spell RETHERFORD Road, and that the appropriate city department or departments install and erect the necessary signs depicting the name of this road.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion with a second. Any further discussion? If not, we'll vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. You have your road changed.
Ms. McMahon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor and board.
Yes, sir.
This brings us to the public hearing of the $1 million cap loan for the extension of the water lines within the city of Starkville. How you doing tonight?
I'm fine, thank you. Mayor, Alderman, The Mississippi Development Authority's cap loan program requires that the general public be informed of the city's intent to seek funding through this particular program. On December the 19th, 2006, the board passed a resolution of intent that they would seek a $1 million cap loan from the Mississippi Development Authority to be used to extend the water lines into the annexed areas. This water extension will be strictly for fire protection. The program requires that you advertise once a week for 4 consecutive weeks. That period ended last week, and I'm here tonight to move forward with the project by conducting the public hearing, asking has the city received any written or verbal comments regarding this project?
At this time, I know of any. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to protest this or commend this or whatever you'd like to do at this time? You are welcome to demonstrate.
We've given the public an ample amount of time and public notification, so the next step will be to pass a resolution authorizing the moving forward of this project.
And Mr. Favor, do you have the resolution prepared for this?
No.
It's in your packet, I
Okay.
prepared it.
Have you had a chance to look at it?
Pardon?
It's on the table.
It's on the table itself.
I didn't see it.
This is it right here. Take a look at it and see if it meets all the standards of a proper resolution that we would need to. Does it look acceptable?
It is. Does it need to be in resolution form?
Actually, we just need a board order authorized.
That's what I thought, because this is not an actual resolution. Although the board resolved to do it, it wasn't put in resolution form, but it appears on the minutes as a resolution. Is that
Well, there was a resolution of intent.
right?
We've advertised that, gone through. All we need now is the board to authorize the submittal, the formal submittal of the application. There has been no public objection, so now we need to acknowledge that and move forward.
Okay. Before we get started, do we have any questions in regard to the public hearing or any other issue?
It's from the minutes.
We need a motion that we move forward for pursuit of this loan. Am I not correct about that?
Correct. It's a $1 million cap loan for public improvements.
Do we have a motion that we,
This is for y'all to submit on the city, paperwork on the city's behalf
Correct.
to MDA? Is that
Correct. Correct.
I move that the Board of Aldermen authorize the Golden Triangle Planning Development District to submit the appropriate paperwork to the Mississippi Development Authority for a declaration of intent to obtain a capital improvement loan in the amount of $1 million for the extension of fire service water lines to the recently annexed areas of the city.
Correct.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion of this? If not, we'll call for a question here. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item is that for authorization to seek proposals for appraisal services and review appraisal services. You're back.
I'm back.
You didn't know you were going to be there that quick.
No, sir.
For the CDBG grant that we received and implementing the Rock Hill area sewage.
The next step on your Rock Hill sewer improvements project that's funded with a Community Development Block Grant and an Appalachian Regional Commission grant will be to advertise for proposals for appraisal and review appraisal services. As with all professional services, we advertise that you are interested in receiving proposals. We will solicit to the Mississippi Contract Procurement Center, to minority firms by certified receipt return mail. And as always, the committee will review the proposals that are submitted for appraisal and review appraisal services, utilizing a rating process which will be included in the advertisement, and fee will not be a factor. As with all professional services, you want the most qualified individual, not necessarily the least expensive. However, we have a limited budget and a contract will be negotiated with the highest rated proposer, and if an agreed amount cannot be negotiated, we'll move forward to the next highest rated proposal. Are there any questions? All we're doing is following state procurement guidelines for appraisal and review appraisal services, which might possibly be needed in this project.
You have a motion to authorize seek proposals.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think
I'll take care.
I think tonight we may be through with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
I'll
for
take care of the
participation.
advertisement and the solicitation.
Okay, and do we have the chairman of our election commission? It's our presentation of the validation and certification of the petition.
Evening, Mr. Mayor, board members. As you well know, we had a petition presented to the city on Tuesday, 2nd of January. I believe you all have a letter in front of you explaining what the election commission did and the results thereof. I certainly want to commend the other 4 members of the election commission who did a lot of the work, and certainly the city clerk's office. It was a lot worse than grading papers, I'll tell you. There were 141 pages of petitions with varying numbers of signatures on each page. A total of 2,180 signatures submitted. A total of 1,912 were found to be valid. The remaining were ineligible for various reasons, such as not being on the roll, not living in the city limits, possibly changing their names, using nicknames, situations where one spouse signed for the other, and we must have individual original signatures. Duplicate names, had a handful of people that signed more than once, and unfortunately there were a few that were just plain undecipherable, even though we had, in most cases, print and script. As per state statute, a list of those names that were not counted or accepted is available, is posted at City Hall, and I understand will be put on the city's website for a 10-day period, so that any disallowed voters may contact the city clerk's office to correct any errors or omissions. Again, it was an interesting experience, and everything is locked up in the city clerk's office. And again, I wish to thank my fellow commissioners for a job well done.
Mr. Mayor, may I be recognized?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, let me just say, Mr. Rosenhan, we certainly appreciate all your hard work together with the other commissioners and the city clerk and the staff of verifying these petitions. Mr. Rosenhan, in a lot of your report, first of all, let me say that your letter states that you verified the petition calling for an election. I think the wording on the petition was that we are requesting an election, and that was a lot of signatures, and I want to commend the gentleman from Ward 2 who sought and gathered the petitions with regard to ensuring that people have a right to vote on this very vital matter. And Mr. Turner just stated under the comment section that hopefully this matter will be resolved very soon. In light of the fact that the signatures were gathered, I think it is very incumbent upon the board to proceed forward with scheduling an election for this matter. It is my opinion that once the voters affix their signatures to this petition, it was their intent that an election should be called on this matter. Of course, the language in the resolution that was passed on a split vote with the mayor casting the tie-breaking vote on December 5, 2006 was that if 10% of the qualified electors or 1,500 of the electors, whichever is the lesser of the two amounts, then no bond shall be issued unless an election is called and scheduled as authorized by law. Of course, that resolution does not mandate an election, but it's certainly the intent of the electors for the board to call an election. I think it's only fair above board for this board to proceed forward and schedule an election as opposed to doing something different. I think if the board did something different, it would certainly fly in the face of the persons signing their names to the petition. Therefore, Mr. Mayor, I move that this board receive, accept, validate, and certify the signatures being 1,912 valid signatures and the entire certification process as it's presented from the Election Commission, and that this mayor and board schedule an election on the matter as to whether or not bonds should be issued in an amount up to $5.9 million to raise money for the purpose of erecting police stations and other specified municipal matters that is set forth in the resolution that was adopted by the board on a split vote on December 5, 2006, and that this election be held on Tuesday, April 24, 2007, and that the Election Commission, together with the city clerk, ensure that all the necessary ballots and other materials are ready for said election on April 24, 2007. And I offer that motion, Mr. Mayor.
We have a motion. Do we have a second to Mr. Perkins' motion? Do we have a second to the motion, calling for an election?
There's two parts to the motion. The first part of the motion is he seeking to adjudicate the validity of the certification process and adjudicate.
No, it's just one
No,
part.
it's all one.
It's all one motion.
I want to make sure it's clear.
Yes, sir, it's one motion.
All one motion.
All one motion.
But I said there's two parts to the motion.
Right. But it's all one motion.
Okay.
Whew. I believe that dies from a lack of a second. We appreciate your hard work and the verification of this, and that we hope that we can call on your committee again and commission in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor, if I may say one other thing, may I be recognized briefly, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, what this board has just done, it has just shown defiance to the people who signed those signatures of their right to vote. And the right to vote is a very fundamental and constitutional rights afforded under the Constitution. The signatures that will get affixed to the petition said, "We, the undersigned electors, request for an election to be held," and the people cannot trust its governing body. I don't know who they can trust, and so there was complete silence on this motion, and I just want to go on record for the people to know that I do support their right to vote, and I will continue to do so. And if the people sign a petition, they certainly deserve the right to be heard as opposed to the board just sitting silent, not taking any action. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I think there'll end up being an alternate discussion for resolution on this issue tonight. And of course, I have a feeling people have noticed already that Alderman McLaurin isn't here tonight. And I know that has a very strong thoughts about this, and we've previously made issue of proceeding on important matters without a full board. And I think if we're going to be consistent on that, then we should at least discuss that. And for me, the questions for us are, as a community, are how do we move forward with this issue, and how do we invest our time and effort and money over the next 90 days? And yes, it's very clear that we're at an impasse as a community, but it doesn't mean we have to remain at an impasse. We all agree that we have significant needs, and where we've differed is over the details.
Gentlemen, what's your proposal? You have,
For my belief is that the object of any petition is to make sure that the community's voice is heard. 2,000 signatures in a few short weeks speaks volumes, and tonight I think we'll talk through that all sides are willing to set aside that recent proposal. And so we could move forward and call an election, or instead we could move forward in a new direction and have the opportunity to achieve consensus. And for me, it's what do we want to do over the next 90 days? I'd recommend that we work diligently to develop a new plan for our needs that would include our municipal court, police station, and city hall. And further, I'd recommend that we establish an advisory work group that would be made up of board members and community members to assist us in this task. Basically, we need to start over. We need to work in good faith, and we need to come up with a plan that we can all, as a full board, support and ultimately achieve community consensus with. And that's the direction I see us heading. We can move down a road over the next 90 days where we proceed with this, or we can do what I believe was the intention of the petition, and that was for the community's voice to be heard, for us to present a new proposal to consider all options, and that's the direction I think we need to move in.
you offering that in the form of a motion, gentlemen?
Not yet. I'd certainly like to hear from other members on the board.
Do other members of the board have any comments pertaining to this?
I do, Mr. Mayor. One thing and since Mr. Perkins is anxious for a motion, I would like to offer a motion that this board adjudicate and validate that 1,912 signatures were received on a petition of protest against the issuance of $5.9 million worth of general obligation bonds without a referendum.
Do we have a second to?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
To adjudicate the petition and its validity of 1,912 signatures in protest of the issuance of $5.9 million general obligation bonds.
Second.
Okay, you just want to just adjudicate, okay?
Yes.
To
We
adjudicate.
have a motion and a second. Do we need to discuss that any further?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to offer an amendment to that motion, and the amendment is to adjudicate it with calling for an election on April the 24th of 2007. And of course, again, that's important because that's what the people asked for. The people did not ask for a committee process. I've been down that road before with the Sportsplex. I cast a very important vote on my first term for a very vital aspect to be included in the Sportsplex. And once the matter was approved by the board, it went to a committee process, and when the committee process had finished with it, it came back to the board without that aspect of it, and the board was bound and is thinking to accept the full recommendation of the committee process. So if we allow a committee process, it's going to further bog this down. You're going to have a lot of politics in it. You're going to have a handful of citizens making multi-million-dollar decisions and recommendations to the citizenry. And I think it's very important to honor what the people have asked for. The board need to follow its own language in this resolution. That was the intent of the people. There's nothing wrong with an election. Obviously, there's some fear and intimidation from those at this table as to what the outcome may be. This is a democratic process, and I ask that the amendment be adopted to the motion.
Do we have a second to the amendment, the motion to have the amendment? The amendment dies from a lack of a second and a vote.
Mr. Mayor.
We'll go back to the original motion.
Mr. Mayor, I think that this board needs to adjudicate and validate that we had the 1,912 signatures on the petition of protest, recognizing that this board cannot proceed with the issuance of any bonds without the election. I don't think anybody at this table is saying they're scared of the election. I personally don't think it would pass if it were to go to election, and we'd be right back to this process asking what we're going to do in the middle of April rather than getting started on it now. And I think that is what Alderman Cox was discussing earlier, in that the people who signed the protest petition we're protesting against this board issuing that $5.9 million of bond without their voices being heard. By us adjudicating that we had the signatures and would be forced to have an election, and yet not having it, that's a dead bond issue. It's basically saving us the expense, time, work on the election commission's part, and just admitting that, we need to go in a different direction on this thing. With all due respect to Alderman Perkins, I don't think anybody up here, and I don't think particularly those who work so hard on the petition drive at this table are scared of letting the people vote. And I don't want to speak for you, but...
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Well, I didn't interrupt you, so please don't interrupt me, Mr. Perkins.
I would like to concur.
Don't interrupt me. I still got the floor.
Hang on, you still got the floor.
Sorry.
You got to be recognized, get the floor.
And so, in summary, Alderman Perkins, I'll try to make this short. Let's validate these signatures and adjudicate that it is valid and that the city cannot proceed in the issuance of these bonds without the election. Everybody understands that, which I think will suffice those people who signed the petition. And let's go ahead and save the time, money, and effort of going down a road which I think the majority of us realize is probably lost anyway, and start fresh and look at a new approach to see if we can come to some consensus around an issue and present something to sell to the public where we can all agree on, which I think was the intent of Alderman Cox's proposal. So with that, I'll yield the floor, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. You've heard Mr. Davis's motion. We will vote at this time on his motion. Do we have any further discussion?
I was just going to say that if it can save another $13,000, I believe is what it costs to have an election, and we can move on and proceed with this, then that would be my preference. I also want to apologize for interrupting Alderman Davis, and also ask that Alderman Cox not be interrupted anymore while he's speaking.
We will now vote on this motion.
Mr. Mayor.
Well, your amendment did not get a second to it.
I have a question to the chair.
Your question?
Yes, sir. Just a point of personal privilege. Please make sure that there's no personal attacks at this table.
I wasn't aware there's been any.
Well, there has been.
Well, I didn't hear it.
If the chair could ensure that there are none, I appreciate it.
All right, we'll do that. We will now vote. All those in favor of the motion, can you hear? You got your hearing aid on?
My hearing aid.
You got it on?
Here.
You can hear me now?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We will now vote on this motion that we have. All those in favor of it say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Thank you, sir. It brings us down to consideration of amendment to the false alarm ordinance, and I think that's one of your issues, isn't it, Mr. Attorney?
It is. Mayor and Board, as you know, last time for your perusal, you were presented a new false alarm ordinance. And prior to passing and considering that ordinance, you wanted me to address the issue whether or not basically there's jurisdiction pursuant to the fire contracts, and we have about 4 amendments from the previous one that allows the city to enforce this ordinance on campus. Based on my review of the contract, there is no such provision that will allow that. However, there are some avenues that the city could, and the other reason that I say that the city cannot enforce this without the contract is because any rules or regulations to be promulgated to Institute of Higher Learning have to be approved by the Board of Trustees, and that's pursuant to state statute. The contract between Mississippi State and MSU regarding the fire protection creates, as you know, a fire district. And under paragraph 6 of the contract, it requires MSU agrees to establish policies and requirements similar to those adopted by the city under paragraph number 6. Under paragraph number 7, obviously, you know that a fire district is created. Paragraph number 10 creates that ordinance for the fire. The city is the city ordinance that creates a fire district. So I would say that there is no provision that allows the city to enforce at this time, there is no ordinance that I'm aware of that was adopted along with that fire district, creating the fire district. and there's no provision in the contract that allows for it. However, as I say, under paragraph 6 of that contract, we could, the parties that negotiated the contract could go back to Mississippi State and try to ask them to establish policies and requirements similar to those adopted by the city to allow the city to enforce the fire alarm ordinance.
So you said a whole lot, Mr. Attorney. So in short, one sentence,
In one
give us
sentence, no,
one-
we cannot enforce the fire alarm ordinance if it passes tonight on campus within the jurisdiction of MSU,
But we could at the Pike Cap Alpha House, right?
as long as it's within the city limits of
It is.
Mississippi State. And not Mississippi State, Starkville.
And at our next contract renegotiation, we can
We
include
need
this as
to
part of
include
that.
this.
We need to, they're required to establish policies and requirements that we have. And that includes building codes, those kinds of things, and it allows for some, it seems to say that that should be something that should be part of the negotiations in the contract.
So this is something we need to do in the next contract that we have with Mississippi State. And I believe that contract's for 2 years, isn't it? Every 2 years. So we've
Yes.
got approximately another year.
About another year, and then we'll go back.
What we
Go
do,
back.
basically what we do is we have the original contract that was signed many, many years ago, and we agree to renew the original contract, and then we have amendments there too, which we're at number 4 right now. So that's the process that takes place, and I think it comes up again isn't it this year?
2008.
It is?
I think it's 2008.
I thought it was the first year I was here, but
And it might be, I'll
I
have to
think
go
it
back
comes
and
up
look.
2007, Ms. Brule might know, but, okay.
All right. So there's not anything we can do as far as right now until the new contract is coming forth on it. So there's no reason to do any type of legislative situation at the present time.
Well, the ordinance would help us
No,
inside the
I
city
didn't say,
limits.
no, I didn't
Yes.
say that there was no need to do any legislation. That's something that the
Well, I thought
board
it was
is.
pertaining to that.
No,
That's where we need clarification right there.
The
Okay.
board, prior to passing the false alarm ordinance, wanted the information as to whether or not this ordinance would be enforceable
On the campus.
on campus.
Okay.
And this does not only cover fire false alarms, but also police false alarms too.
Throughout the whole city.
That's
not
right,
just
throughout the
other
city,
part.
not the campus.
And of course, all our problems are within the city.
Do we need to reread this ordinance in its entirety for us to consider it tonight?
It's not necessary to be read unless somebody requests it to be read.
No one requesting that? Well, I would move approval of this ordinance providing for the establishment of fines and penalties for false alarms within the city limits
Of the city.
of the city.
Yeah.
And this would be 2007-01.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion of this motion? This is strictly within the city limits, the confines of the city limits, and we have no jurisdictions at this particular point with the university. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Brings us down to consideration of the erosion control ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, before we move on, could I just make a couple of things plain, especially for the public and the press and the board members as well? I know I contained in y'all's packet an additional update, but some may wonder why this is necessary. I just wanted to point it out because it's going to affect a lot of people in the city. We initially passed an ordinance such as this almost 20 years ago because we were having these very same problems. And over the years, it became unenforceable, and now we're tweaking it. But some might wonder why we're doing this. I had a team of 4 officers go over all our statistics for the calendar year of 2006. And I wanted the public especially to be aware of the fact that the Starkville Police Department responded to, and it was hard for me to believe, 1,958 alarms in a 12-month period, 2006. Well over 95% of these alarms were false alarms. a vast majority of these alarms were at commercial businesses. Most of the residential customers were very much aware of the fact that their alarm systems were in proper working order. Some of the violators were what we consider to be habitual, perpetual violators. In particular, some as many as 8-9 times a night. To give you an idea of what that does, not only does it spawn a problem with the responding officers thinking that this is just another false alarm and they have this apathetic feeling, and sooner or later they run up on the real thing and they may not be mentally prepared for it, which is a dangerous situation. I crunched some numbers on this, and to respond to those almost 2,000 alarms, it takes on an average of one officer 15 minutes to service an alarm. And whenever you send one officer to an alarm, you send a backup officer as well. So that's 30 minutes of downtime for those two officers combined. That resulted in 979 wasted man hours on patrol at a cost of $12,100 last year in one 12-month period. Now, that's just the police alarms, and Chief Grantham can speak to the fire alarms, and we were just talking about that.
We had somewhere between 1,200 and 1,300 calls. 26% of our calls are false alarms. And there again, on any time when a fire alarm comes in, we treat it as a structure fire, not knowing what it is. So we send 50% of our staff, 2 stations, to that dwelling. So we tie up 50% of the citizens' protection there on a false alarm. And most of our false alarms are commercial too.
The passage of time. We have shared your joy at the birth of your children, and proudly we have watched them grow. We've taken care of your healthcare needs during the good times and the not so good. Your parents and grandparents have depended upon us. Together we have shared the struggles and the wonders of life. At Oktibbeha County Hospital, we are celebrating 30 years of being your lifelong choice in healthcare.
Along with William, will take part of the blame for that because we hadn't brought it to y'all's attention sooner, but it has reached the point of boiling over to where we have police cars responding multiple times a day in fire trucks, and they have to respond like it's the real thing, lights, sirens, running intersections, endangering themselves and the public, when most of the time it's simply not. But you can't make that guess or predetermination. So as a result of all this, what's going to happen is when this ordinance goes into effect, and I believe it's 30 days, is that right, Mr. Faber, from publication? An individual that has an alarm system will be granted 2 false alarms in a 12-month calendar period. If there is a third subsequent alarm, that alarm and each subsequent alarm after that will cost $300 a pop. So you get 2 free ones, and the third one costs you $300, and the next one costs you $300, and the next one costs you $300. And there are a couple of commercial entities in town that are going to have to borrow money from Fort Knox if they keep up the rate of false alarms that they have had during the last year. And I just want to put them on notice that we're going to intend on enforcing that, because we're going to get an officer, a firefighter, or a civilian killed if we don't. And appreciate the board's help and attention.
Consideration of the erosion control ordinance is recommended for approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Mr. Faber, I think you've had an opportunity to look at that as well, haven't you?
That is, I have, the ordinance was approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission in the form that you see it, except I put some language necessary in all ordinances. The only other change from what the Planning and Zoning Commission looked at was in the original draft that they had, there was a misprint. It said under penalties, it said 6 months. Obviously, as you know, state law doesn't allow us to pass an ordinance jailing anybody up to 6 months. So I changed it to, should say 60 days. So that's the only change, except for the 2 whereas paragraphs in the beginning and then some language that I put section. Well, anyway, that's the only change from what they saw.
Do we have a motion to
Mayor.
accept?
Mayor and Board, I move that we approve ordinance number 2007-2, an ordinance providing for the establishment of erosion control within the city limits of the city of Starkville, Mississippi, with the correction noted, and authorize the city clerk to advertise the publication thereof.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion with a second. Is there any discussion of the motion?
Just a question for Mr. Favor, Mr. Mayor. How does this impact, let's say you've got a development and they come back in and rework and they're going to do some grading on a piece of property that's already been platted or met site plan review and everything, do they have to then come back in and go through this process if they've already been through the initial site plan? And do you understand my question?
Well, if the ordinance, if they've already gone through the site plan review process.
Yeah, and let's say they build it, but then they want to come back in and change. Do they have to come back and start all over again?
I don't know if they'd have to come back, but start over.
But would they have to, if they were doing major grading or clearing, they'd have to come in and get a
They'd
permit?
have to come in and get a permit.
Even if there was an existing structure and the property owner wanted to make some changes on the property?
Conceivably, probably, yes, they would, depending on the nature and the scope of the work that they were doing.
Okay. If it met the requirements of the definitions laid
Right.
forth in this ordinance?
Right. But as you know, you have to take it on a case-by-case basis.
Right,
But,
right.
Considering the nature and the scope of what they would be doing, probably, I'd say most of the time, if it's a large-scale change,
Right. Okay.
the best thing they could do is check with Mr. Webb to make sure before they undertake any type of change other than what they put forth in their site plan review. That's the safest thing for them to do.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second that we accept this. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. It brings us down to the next item, F, is consent. It brings us down to consideration of approval of the contract Gary Schaefer, the Parks and Recreational Buildings. Mr. Favor.
Again, this was, as I review all contracts with the city, this was a contract with Mr. Schaefer regarding, as the architect for the Parks and Recreation facility. If you look through, there's two parts to this contract. There's the first part deals with the terms of the contract. The second part deals with the duties and basically that Mr. Schaefer has in regard to this project. You can see there's marked out things that were marked out by computer and marked out by me. Those things have been agreed by Mr. Schaefer. I was not comfortable with. Mr. Schaefer's agreed to those things to be left out of his contract. The only thing that is not left out, if you look under compensation, it calls for a logarithm formula for his compensation. That's not up to me to decide. That's up to you to decide how he's to be compensated for this. And so therefore, I crossed that out because it had not been approved by the board. I asked this to be put on the agenda, and I made sure that Ms. Tyndall told me last week that you'd all received this last week because it is quite extensive. But the gist of it is that you need to be comfortable with the compensation that you are approving for Mr. Schaefer. And the way it was explained to me by Mr. Schaefer, the logarithm formula that's spelled out in Article 1.5 under compensation is used in all state contracts. The other, under 1.52, is how Mr. Schaefer and his office is to be compensated if there's additional work to be done that's not in the contract, and there's extensive language regarding what is additional work for Mr. Schaefer and his staff. So the main thing that you are to look at tonight is the compensation, and if Mr. Schaefer is not here, I don't think, and I told him that unless it was requested of him to be here, that he didn't need to be here unless you wanted him to be, unless it was told to him that he needed to be here.
Ms. Isaac, have you all considered this contract and made a recommendation specific to this contract? I know you all voted to approve him, but did y'all actually look through this contract and as a board vote on it?
Doesn't even fall under our jurisdiction, does it?
We have looked at the contract, but we have to admit that we also couldn't follow the formula all that well as to how they're being compensated. Thus, we went the route.
Right.
We don't fully understand
They asked me to review the contract, and they asked me to review the contract, and so therefore I review the contract.
I think I'd be more comfortable
I don't give
with
advice.
Park and Rec.
They had asked him to review, speak up.
What I was
in regard to
told
this.
was that that the Parks and Rec Board told Mr. Schaefer, basically whatever they wanted me to sit down with him and go over the contract. And so therefore, right, Ms. Isaac? I don't want to speak for you because I wasn't there, but is that right? So once I'm asked to review a contract, I don't advise the Park and Rec Board, I advise the Board of Aldermen who approves the contract. So therefore, it changes what my advice is. So now I'm advising you as to what my findings were in the contract and the problems I had with the contract, but I can't approve the compensation. You have to do that. And so that's why it's in front of you today, and that's why Miss Isaac's shaking her head, because
So you want us to make a decision, Parks and Rec Board, is that right, basically?
I don't tell you what, no.
Decision, but as to what Rodney is saying as legal counsel.
Well, as legal counsel though, but then he's suggesting to the Board of Aldermen here that you all make a decision in regard that you're gonna follow his contract. And that is, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that's out of the purview of the board, since we have an autonomous board that runs Park and Rec.
You do, but the board has to approve the funds, the use of the bond funds. So basically, that's why it's here.
That's interesting.
I can't approve the compensation. That has to be approved by the board. I mean, they can come to you and say, we want Mr. Schaefer, and we've approved the contract. If you don't want to approve it, you want to go ahead and approve it, that's up to you to do as the board. But I don't step into your shoes to say that that's what you want to do, so.
I think we need to take this in advisement if we can.
Yeah. When does Mr. Schaefer need this finalized? Can he wait 2 weeks?
Clark?
Yeah.
Can you wait 2 weeks on it? Yeah. When's y'all's next meeting?
The next Park Commission meeting would be the first Monday in February.
First Monday in February?
Okay. We can have but we can call a special meeting if we want. No problem.
And let me get something correct here. Basically, you were asking the city council to study this, not necessarily for the board to pass on it, but for your own information. Is that correct?
That's right.
Because you don't have an attorney. And basically using the city attorney.
You got a contract.
And if you had your own attorney, you wouldn't even come through here and ask. Is that what I understand?
You're smart, man.
I was on school board 15 years. I couldn't imagine coming up and asking the city to review a bond issue. School board members.
Pretty much. We'll take it under, I suggest we just take it under advisement.
Yeah. Is that agreeable with the board that we take this under advisement, get these kinds of details worked out?
Yeah.
Yes. We'll move on. The next item, H, is consent. Brings us down to the report from the Budget Committee.
Just very briefly, Board, if you wouldn't mind joining us. We, as a Budget Committee, had talked with the full board over the last months that we were looking to conduct a comprehensive salary survey that would consider internal and external equity issues. And Mr. Greer has reviewed our salaries across positions and compared that to our peer group, which is Columbus, Oxford, and Tupelo. And that information, of course, was shared with everyone. It is an incomplete report tonight because we have completed the year-end accounting, but it does not appear that we'll have funds at this time to to make salary adjustments. Both because there weren't any positive surprises on revenue side, and the expenses were fully accounted for on the budget side. There doesn't appear to be a positive surprise for us to consider, but we did want to start this information, and what we talked about in a budget committee is that we didn't get to this point where some of our employee salaries are below that peer group average overnight, and we won't be able to fix it overnight. But Boyd, I know you've spent a lot of time on this. Perhaps you could share with us.
Yeah, as you know, what I found was about 2/3 of our jobs are paid less than the surrounding area. We have some jobs, and it's in your packet, I pointed out 8 of them, which are significantly underpaid compared to the market and the surrounding area. Over the years, well, let me just say that one thing I've really been impressed with since I've been here is the quality of the employees that work for the city. We've got high-quality employees, but as we lose them, we can't afford to replace them because the market has moved ahead of the employees that work here. So we need to think about somehow getting the pay rates raised for the city employees. So that's kind of what I've seen from the survey and from talking to the employees. So.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Perkins?
I'd like to ask Mr. Cox one question. Mr. Budget Chairman, have you been able to identify any money in the budget for street overlays?
We have budgeted money from the start of the 2006-2007 budget, which hasn't been appropriated. As I understand it, it's with the Infrastructure Committee to make that final recommendation.
I'm sorry, what's the sum of money available?
It's a minimum of $400,000 plus dollars that were identified for streets and drainage. And of course, it was the original intention that we would parlay that into a greater source with a comprehensive infrastructure improvement bond. But as of right now, we have the money sitting in the budget, waiting on a report out from the Infrastructure Committee on how to best use that as a recommendation.
Mr. Mayor, or may I be recognized?
Mr. Davis?
Boyd, thank you for this information. One thing that I would caution us, though, is let's not look at just Columbus, Oxford, and Tupelo for certain positions, for example, and there are other positions, and I'll just use this because it's on the front page. When you look at police officers, we do have the Oktibbeha County Sheriff's Office and MSU Campus PD here locally, where if those salaries are unadjusted, then you're not even talking about moving out of town. Person stays here, takes a job at one of those agencies if salary is not competitive, and I don't see those on here. So I'd like to see those numbers as well. And I'm sure that Ed can give you some comparable agencies other than these 3 cities for his outside people, for example. And so let's not just limit ourselves to these 3, but let's also try to look at actual, agencies within our very close area where our workers could conceivably not even move and yet take a different position doing the same thing, getting paid more money perhaps. So, but I commend you on the start.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's all.
Okay.
Thank you. Richard, we have you in line for a report from the Technology Committee.
Yes, Mayor. The Tech Committee only has one item to bring before the board today, and that is simply an announcement. We have been working with Al Quinn and Patrick Miller concerning the City of Starkville's website and have set March 1st, 2007 as the go-live date for the actual city website. Over the course of the month of February, Al Quinn is going to be working extensively with that, making sure that there are no problems and that we get everything on there that we need to have.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions from Mr. Corey? Brings us down to departmental business, Building Codes Planning Department. The first item is consideration request from Mr. Holly Ford and Ms. Betty Ford for a zoning change from a C1 neighborhood zone to an R2. Mr. You're going to present these things for us tonight, is that
yes,
correct?
Mr. Webb's out due to illness, asked for me to fill in for him.
Very good.
First item we have is Mr. and Mrs. Ford asking for a zoning change from C1 to R2 at 1407 Louisville Street. I believe is the address we have.
Mr. Honeycutt.
And
Both of these first two are Louisville Street, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Do you have a question, Mr. Perkins?
Yes, sir, that's consistent with the request that we approved for the markers, Angela Watt, I believe, they on that Louisville Street, where we changed it from C1, so we're just making these changes to be compatible to the residential neighborhood as it exists, right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the request for Roman number 10A1 and 2.
Okay, we have a motion for approval of Roman number 10 for 1 and 2, approval of changing from a commercial to that of a residential. Do we have a second for this motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'll second that with just an additional clarification that the rationale for making this change is due to a Scrivener's error.
And I agree with that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. We have a motion, and it's second. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Brings us down to consideration of request from Ms. Becky Ray.
Well, I believe we've still got one other on Mr. And Mrs. Reese for zoning change in the same
No,
neighborhood.
we just did that.
We did them both.
We did
Oh, you
1
did
and
both?
2.
Excuse me.
We're moving fast.
Yes. Ms. Becky Ray for special use exception to renovate a structure in a C2 general business zone for use as a residential structure. And I believe that was on Lafayette Street by the railroad.
And that was
tracks.
recommended by the planning zone, is that correct?
Yes.
It's surrounded by residential, this little spot thing down there, everything to the south of that place is all residential, I believe. Is that
Yes,
correct?
That's correct.
Based on the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission, I'd move approval of the request of Ms. Becky Ray for the special use exception to renovate the structure on 300A Lafayette Street as a residential structure. It's currently zoned C2.
Do we have a second?
There's also in the motion, Alderman, it needs to state what the special exception conditions are, if you wouldn't mind doing that for the minutes.
The special exception would be residential and a commercial.
It has to, the special use exception, and you wouldn't know this because you weren't at the meeting, so basically it says that provided that the special use exception is granted, provided that the footprint of the structure is not changed, and that the special use exception expires when the property ownership changes.
Fair enough.
We just need to have it in the minutes.
So included.
Okay.
And did we have a second to your motion?
Not yet.
I'll second.
We got a motion with a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. All right, the next item is consideration of final plat approval for Laurel Valley Court subdivision. Ms. Sproul, is this Mr. Joe Dallas's?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, and I think all of you should probably have a plat of this in your folder. And I was told that all of it has been signed. Is that, everything is appropriately signed? This was recommended by Planning and Zoning. Is that right, Mr. Honeycutt?
Yes, sir, that's correct. And I believe some paperwork regarding the funds for final overlay is in hand.
You have on the table the actual certificate of deposit that Mr. Dallas procured, name of the city also, to ensure that the money is available once the 85% occupancy is achieved, to make sure that we get the streets in that subdivision finished. And I don't know for sure, but do you know whether or not Mr. Webb came up with this amount?
Yes,
sure he
that's
did.
supposedly approved by Mr. Webb.
Okay.
I spoke
I
with
didn't
him
talk to
and
him
they...
specifically about this one, so.
Yes, sir.
Do we have a motion?
Based on the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission, I recommend that we move approval of the final plat for Laurel Valley Court subdivision, which is located at the east of South Montgomery Street.
Do we have a second to this motion?
Second.
We have a motion with a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, we'll vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Brings us down to consideration of final plat, the last plat tonight to approve. Mr. Honeycutt, is that not correct?
That's correct. Phase 9, Part 3 of Huntington Park, similar situation, different subdivision.
And I think, did y'all want to get up and speak and
No, sir, I just wanted to make sure that the agenda says phase 9, it's actually phase 8, part 3. Didn't know if that was important or not, just wanted to see.
Will
Yes,
everybody
that is.
please note that change, Phase 8, Part 3, please.
I'd move approval of the final plat for Huntington Park subdivision Phase 8, Part 3, which is located on South Montgomery Street.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion with a second. Is there any discussion? I think everything is in proper order. Is that not right, Mr. Honeycutt? All the signatures are on the map, et cetera.
Once again, Mayor and Board, you have provided on your table a copy of the certificate of deposit named the city. Mr. Jackson got this taken care of. The amount was approved by Mr. Webb, and it's the same situation regarding once the 85%, just making sure that the streets are brought up to city code once the 85% rate is met.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Thank you. That brings us down to, I believe it's personnel. And item number 4 under personnel, request authorization for the fire department personnel. Chief, are you here? You might want to address this. This was not included in the consent agenda. Gentlemen?
This is in agreement with the policy that we passed some time ago. I think it was back November the 26th. We passed a policy that said we could give 10% increases for temporary promotions. So there's several that are affected here.
And the reason why these are temporary, Chief?
Okay, we have 3 open sergeant positions that are vacant that we haven't tested for. And then we have 2 captains out right now. One of them due to military deployment, he went for another year. And then we have Andy Sharp, who is a captain, and broke his hand, had surgery, and he's going to be out probably until April or May. So he's been out since September, and I kept putting it off, thinking, the doctor kept saying therapy, and there were some complications with his hands that caused surgery and some shots and those sort of things. So it's going to be a long-term recovery if he comes back. And the way I came up with these people was I took the senior person within the rank and moved them up. That was basically the best way to do it.
Mr. Mayor, I'll be recognized for.
You may.
Chief, I'm going to be recorded as voting nay on this. My primary and sole reason for doing that is because I voted against the policy. I did not concur with the policy for various reasons, so it's nothing disrespectful to your department, just a policy overall. So I just wanted to share that with you publicly.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If there's not any other comments, I'd move approval of the reclassification of Lieutenant Keith Kennard and Lieutenant Doug Ware as acting captains, Sergeant Tony Claiborne and Jerome Clark to be reclassified as acting lieutenants, and Arthur Logan, Bobby Robinson, Brian Clark, Ryan Thompson, and Trent Helms to be reclassified as acting sergeants with the appropriate temporary salary adjustments according to our recently approved policy.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Do we have any further discussion? If not, we will vote. All those in favor of this motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
It brings us down to item 7, but you didn't get that on your consent.
I didn't.
You probably thought it was marked out. Request authorization to hire Kim Crowley as a radio operator, records clerk at grade 6, step 1.
Do you want to make the motion? Do you want to make the motion? Yeah. Mr. Mayor, I would move to authorize the hiring of Kim Crowley as a radio operator / records clerk at grade
6, Step 1, salary in the amount of $20,107.40 per year, subject to the city's standard probationary periods.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion with a second. If there's not further discussion, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Thank you, sir. Police Department is consent 1 and 2. Public Services is consent 1, 2, and 3.
Mr. Mayor?
Mayor,
Pardon me?
yeah.
May I be recognized for public services?
Yes, do you have something to add to these?
Yes, sir. When Ms. Outlaw was going to ask for something to be added to the claims docket, but she was put on consent agenda, so may I present that to the board at this time?
It doesn't take very long.
No, sir, it won't. I'll just pass this out. For reasons that aren't the fault of a vendor who sold us a good bit of PVC pipe back in December, the paperwork didn't get processed in time to get it on this claims docket in your packet on last Friday.
So you're trying to pay him?
Yeah, I would just request approval to pay Central Pipe for the 2 invoices that are presented on that sheet I just passed out and added to the claims docket presented at the meeting.
Did we get a 2% discount by paying this any quicker?
Well, in the bid, when we put out bids, we get better prices if we say we'll pay within 30 days, and that's...
Okay, this
that
is
was
one of
the
these
bid
issues.
spec, yeah.
Do we have a motion?
I don't have any problems with it. I'm just trying to think how we phrase it, because we haven't actually voted on the consent agenda yet.
No, we haven't.
And we could just add this to the consent agenda.
To the claims docket?
To the claims docket itself.
Could we not do that, Sumner?
Do we need to take any, I guess, just, we'll include it.
Well, since the consent agenda is next, can I recommend this and another change as an amendment to the consent agenda?
Do what now?
Let's deal with this first, Richard.
Let's deal with this first, Richard.
Yes, you could. Just,
Okay. So Tammy was just sharing with me that I've already forgotten the beginning of the meeting, which was we had approved the consent agenda at the first part of the meeting. And if that's the case, then we would need a separate motion to approve this. And so I
we can approve it for,
Consent agenda.
I thought we
I
approved it.
thought you approved the items to be on the consent agenda.
We did approve the items on the consent agenda. We have not read each item yet, and this could be read into the city clerks
So
on the
you'll have
claims.
3 motions, or what you normally have 2 motions for, Mayor.
Pardon me?
The motion was made by Mr. Cox and seconded by Mr. Perkins to approve the consent agenda with those items listed. And then there was a motion to approve the official was Alderman Cox and Alderman Corey.
I think you're right, and that we don't even have to actually go back and read each one of these things, because the particular items were the ones that were approved on the consent agenda.
You read it twice.
Am I not correct about that?
we can just make the motion to pay this
Just
bill.
put the motion is pay this thing.
that we pay these claims as presented.
I think the amount is that first figure, $195,000.
$195,000.
He needs to abstain from voting on it. He voted on it. If he voted on it. He needs to be on record as abstaining. See what I'm saying? He needs to be on record.
I made a motion that we approve payment of this claims docket item for $195,750.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Did you have one item, Mr. Corey?
Yeah, I need to actually,
Which one is it, Richard?
it's E2, and I had made a note here, but forgot to mention what we're going to.
What was previously approved on the consent agenda as Roman numeral, what Roman numeral is this, Richard?
Yes, on Department of Business.
10E Number 2, request acceptance of best quote for the purchase of manholes needed for the Laurel Valley Court and West Country Club Road Sewer Project. I make a motion that that particular item be removed from the consent agenda and I mean, I know we've approved it, but that we rescind that approval of that specific item from the consent agenda.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and rescind and a second. Which item, one more time?
Public Services E2.
Yes.
Public Services.
Right, that we rescind approval of that specific item from the consent agenda.
We have a motion and a second. We open for discussion while we can removing it.
Richard needs
I need to abstain from voting because
well,
I have
he
a
needs to
family.
actually, get up.
All right, yeah, all right.
So you think
Y'all
it's
wanted to-
consent?
Huh?
Look like he voted on it. He can't do that.
Right. Is that it? Did everybody understand that? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. All right, now we need a motion to,
Approval of said item.
we have a motion to make approval of said item under Public Services. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the motion and the second, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay.
Mr. Corey,
Abstained, and with my apologies for us having to go through all that. I had meant to mention that earlier.
Okay, we'll move on, and it brings us down to the executive session. And we have 3 items listed here: land acquisition, personnel, and litigation. And what I would suggest is that we go into a closed session in order to discuss going into executive session. We'll take a short break here.
The passage of time. We have shared your joy at the birth of your children, and proudly we have watched them grow. We've taken care of your health care needs during the good times and the not so good. Your parents and grandparents have depended upon us. Together we have shared the struggles and the wonders of life. At Oktibbeha County Hospital, we are celebrating 30 years of being your lifelong choice in health care.